In this lecture, we'll focus on the Constitutional Convention. It was held in what's now known as Independence Hall in Philadelphia from May 25th to September 17th, 1787. There were several things that all the men in attendance agreed upon. First, they all agreed that the federal government should be stronger than it was under the Articles of Confederation, but that it shouldn't be too strong. They also agreed that the federal government should have separation of powers, that it should consist of three branches, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. But there were plenty of disagreements as well. The most significant of these disagreements had to do with Congress, the legislative branch. The single biggest area of disagreement at the Constitutional Convention was the issue of representation. In other words, how many votes would each seat get in Congress? The first plan to be considered at the convention was James Madison's Virginia Plan, which came to be known as the Large State Plan because it favored the larger states. Unlike under the Articles of Confederation, the Virginia Plan proposed a bicameral or two-house legislature. It favored the larger states because it proposed that both houses be based on population. In other words, the larger the population a state had, the more votes it would have in both houses. Later, William Paterson of New Jersey proposed the New Jersey Plan, which has come to be known as the Small State Plan. This plan was very similar to what had existed under the Articles of Confederation. It had proposed a unicameral legislature, with representation being equal and every state getting one vote. The solution to the big state versus small state debate may seem obvious today, but it wasn't to the framers, and in fact, they debated this for 6 weeks before coming up with a compromise. The solution they arrived at has come to be known as the Connecticut Compromise. Under the compromise, there would be two houses of Congress, with the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, to have its representation based on population, whereas equality would reign in the Senate, with each state given 2 votes. The framers of the Constitution never seriously considered getting rid of slavery. They did, however, consider the issue of slavery as it related to representation. The main issue was whether or not to count slaves for purposes of representation in the House. Obviously, the South wanted to count slaves, whereas the North did not. Their answer, of course, was the notorious 3/5 compromise, in which every 5 slaves would be counted the same as every 3 non-slaves. The framers also debated how long congressional terms should be. The framers felt that longer terms would promote independence and courage on the part of legislators, while shorter terms were seen as being more likely to promote accountability to the voters. Ultimately, they decided they wanted a balance of both independence and accountability by giving the House relatively short 2-year terms, while senators enjoy longer 6-year terms. Whether or not term limits should be imposed on members of Congress is a big issue today, and the framers considered it. And they roundly rejected the idea. The framers also debated how members of Congress should be selected. The framers of the Constitution felt that the House of Representatives should be the most democratic of all federal institutions, and thus it is elected by the people. In fact, originally it was the only institution of the federal government that was elected. Under the original Constitution, however, senators were not elected by the voters, but rather were selected by their state legislatures. This changed with the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913, which provided for the direct election of senators by the people. In the next lecture, we'll take a look at some of the compromises involving the presidency and the judiciary.